So, good morning, afternoon, and evening, and welcome everyone. And many thanks for joining this presentation of the results of 10x10 Photobooks' third cycle of research grants on photobook history. The 10x10 Photobooks was founded in 2012, and the program of research grants on photobook history was established in 2020 to support the investigation of a wide range of topics around photography and print, and to work to fill gaps in the history of the photobook. Each year, more or less, 10x10 issues a call for proposals for research topics, sometimes around a specific theme and sometimes open, related to 10x10's overall mission. For this cycle, many thanks to our jurors, Anne Havinga, who I think is on, Osei Bonsu, and Renee Mousset, for the many excellent proposals we received. We've really been impressed by the range and quality of the suggested topics for this program. 10x10's research grants for this round were generously supported by Marina and Andrew Lewin, Dianita Singh, the Grace Jones Richardson Trust, and Richard Sun. I also wanted to let you know that we are in the process of judging the proposals for the fourth cycle, which should conclude around the middle of 2026. And we should be announcing the results of that selection by the end of May. For today's session, participants will be muted throughout the presentations, but the chat is open. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the 10x10 site. We're going to have three presentations of about 25 minutes and then open it up for discussion and Q&A. If you have questions during the presentations, feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll also enable folks to unmute at the end during the discussion. The three grantees who will be presenting their results today are Sudeshna Rana on Visualizing the Post-Digital Photo Book, studying the influence of global digital cultures on the medium, patronage, and accessibility of the 21st century photo book in South Asia. Sudeshna is an independent writer, editor, and researcher based in India. She was a South Asia Speaks Creative Nonfiction Fellow in 2022 for a project exploring the history of the mining town Dhanbad, where she grew up. She is the co-founder of a digital archive documenting migration stories of East India, which won the Serendipity Visual Arts Grant in 2023. Her writings on media, gender, culture, and ecology have appeared in Paper Planes, Polyester Zine, Smashboard, Feminism in India, and other print digital platforms. Alisa Prince, Tomorrow is Here, Image and Text in the Harlem Book of the Dead, is a scholar, artist, and curator of visual arts and artifacts of the Black diaspora. She is currently a postdoctoral associate of the Society of Fellows in the Department of History of Art and Architecture at Boston University and a contributing editor at the Boston Art Review. Lisa earned her PhD in Visual and Cultural Studies from the University of Rochester. Her work focuses on modern and contemporary Black art and visual culture, history of photography, self-making, Black feminist traditions, and archival theory. Her research has been supported by Arttable, the Henry Luce Foundation, American Council of Learned Societies, the Frederick Douglass Institute for African and African American Studies, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and most recently, 10x10 Photobooks. Ethel-Ruth Tawe will be presenting on the algorithms of colonial African photobooks. She is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher exploring memory in Africa and its diaspora, from photography, collage, and text to moving image and other time-based media. She examines culture and technology, often from a speculative lens. Ethel is a recipient of the Magnum Foundation's Counter Histories grant program for her multimedia project, Image Frequency Modulation, which was also selected for the IDFA DocLab Forum and awarded Black Public Media's 2024 Pitch Black Immersive Award and Fellowship. Her works have been exhibited at Film Museum, the National Museum of Cameroon, Relais Gallery in Lagos, Photo Ireland, and she has presented at the University of Oxford, amongst other places. She is a program affiliate at the New Institute's Black Feminism and the Polycrisis program in Hamburg, where she was a 2024 artist in residence. She has conducted film and image research for selections shown at Tribeca and Black Star Fest Film Festival, the Barbican Center, and Doc NYC, and is a contributor to the British Journal of Photography, Bomb Magazine, We Present, among other presentations. She holds an MSc in Development Studies from SOAS University of London and is currently editor-in-chief at Contemporary and magazine and is based between London, UK, and Arusha in Tanzania. And we will begin with Sudeshna. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, David, for the beautiful introduction. So my topic is visualizing the post-digital photo book in South Asia, and we wanted to discuss mostly the influence of access, medium, and the patronage, which is sort of influencing the whole ecosystem. I understand this is a big topic and a huge geographical area. So our project will basically talk about certain things and miss out a lot, but we have tried to keep it as concise as possible given the time of the presentation. So when we began the project last year, there were certain questions which were on our mind, especially me. I come from a literature background and I wanted to see the production as well as the access of the photo book within through a literary lens, but outwardly a very visual medium. We have seen that the photo book in South Asia exists in multiple formats. It can be a family album. It can be an art object. It can be a catalog of an exhibition. It can be a coffee table book. It can be a souvenir, a gift. It has various end results. The product can be different, but the visual narrative which is being presented through these photo books usually are affected by colonial and cloud capitalism and various other factors. Here is a small index of the type of the rest of the presentation. I wanted to start with my first encounter with the photo book back in 2018 through a book called Portal, The Curious Account of Achintya Bose. It was also discussed last year in from 10x10's Grantee, Nandini Narayan, and its portrayal of a female figure who sort of doesn't age. But the book, when I encountered it, I felt it was more of a historiographic metafiction. It was definitely placed inside a city where I was studying, Kolkata, where I encountered the book. And it, through the print culture and various histories, through photography that represented the city, this book sort of gave me this idea of seeing the photo book as a South Asian, a photo book by a South Asian, and talking about the history of photography from a very local as well as global perspective. Cut to 2024, when I received this grant and began my research, I encountered another book called Angst, which I feel sort of counters the very nostalgic image of Calcutta, which is, but it also falls under this other stereotypical image of Calcutta as a place of hunger, poverty, starvation. It was criticized by Adira Thekowitl and Amarnath Praful as um, as a series of photographs which felt falling back into the colonial gaze. It was exhibited in Arles, Paris, and even the 2019 Venice Biennale. And in the criticism, which was called Field Notes on Othering, what was discussed is how current photographers sort of recapture and repropagate the earlier colonial aesthetics of Calcutta and the larger South Asia. But I feel that these two books are sort of both sides of the city, and taken together, they give a dual look into the city's portrayal through photo books. During this time, I was also interested in photo books from my hometown, which brought me to End of Time, which is on your left bottom. The book received a grant from Instagram and Getty, which sort of brings back this patronage from Western countries and how the way a city or a place can be presented continues to cater to that Western gaze. The book on the top of your left, which is Fields of Sight, sort of counters these problems and issues within photography and other printed culture. It's called Fields of Sight by Gauri Gill, and she collaborated with Rajesh Wenger, who is a famous Burli artist. It's a folk art, and on top of Gauri's pictures, Rajesh has created this montage of symbols through his paintings, which talk about climate, which talk about a loss of a way of life for the indigenous people and what happens in this post-colonial countries where progress is something that we are always striving for. The Power Plant by Ravi Agarwal again talks about climate, which is a sort of recurring motif in a large number of photographers from India and South Asia. And in The Coast, Saurabh Hura, which is the book on your right top, he creates a visual narrative through a short fiction story. And the text also is juxtaposed with images of the coastlines of India. And it sort of creates a space where land, sea, and sky sort of converge. And through these stories, he's able to talk about a narrative of gender, caste, and various other socio-political issues that the country has been facing. On your bottom left, right, is the book Ongar by Pratik Sarkar. It's a long project. It talks about coal again in a more through two facets of time, the geological time and the colonial time. His pictures sort of, according to Shreya Chatterjee, who contributed a text to this photo book and the larger project, calls it post technological picturesque aesthetic, which drives from the picturesque aesthetic of the earlier colonial photographers, but sorts of plays with that idea and brings nuance to a conversation of climate and the landscape in this region. Next, I specifically wanted to talk about gender and the feminist gaze in the in the photo books of South Asia, and these few of them caught my attention. The first one on your left top is called Beauty Amid War by Fatima Hosseini. She has she has photographed a range of women from Afghanistan, from diverse backgrounds, Pashtuns, Hazara women, and instead of their portrayal as weak and victims of gender appetite in the country, she has given them this portrayal, which is more through a gaze which looks back at their portrayal, and it also talks about style and through power dressing, how they're able to portray themselves against the stereotypes. Bali Kya Mela, again by Gauri Gill, is about a photo stall which she opened in a rural fair in Rajasthan, which is the western side of India, and how the women there entered the photo stall and sort of shed their patriarchal, the sort of repression which they face outside in public space, but inside the studio they were free to be themselves, and the pictures speak of that. A few of the women from this project were also able to open their own photo stalls. On the bottom left is We Cry in Silence, which is an 8-year-long project by Smita Sharma about victims of human trafficking. And the book was also used to sensitize workers who work in the trafficking, like police officials and other NGO workers, to sensitize them to the issue. On your bottom right is a book called The Public Life of Women, which is a product of Nepal Picture Library. It began as an exhibition and later became this behemoth of a book, which talked about women in Nepal in the public space again. Some starting peasant revolts, some going about their life, attending conferences internationally, talking about workers' rights. And it through their archiving practice, they have created a book which sort of again breaks a stereotype of women as from South Asia as weak or victims. Um, then we have other community projects, which is also a part of photobook ecosystem in South Asia. Songs of Our People by Anurag Banerjee talks about his musicians from his hometown in Shillong, which is a small town in Northeast India. And through collaborating with various musicians, he has created a book. On center top is Parsing, which is about the Parsi community in Jamshedpur. It won the Al-Ghazi Photobook Grant and talks about the community through their archives. On your top right is Bridging the Gap, which is a collaborative project between 6 women photographers from Myanmar and 6 from Bangladesh. While the project was a collaborative cross-boundary, cross-border project, and women from Bangladesh were able to go to Myanmar to collaborate for this project. Women from Myanmar couldn't come to Bangladesh, which was the second part of their practice, but because of visa issues. And it sort of talks about how within the region we have all these boundaries and cultural boundaries and political borders, which hampers collaboration. The bottom right is another book called Time and Tide by Karan Kapoor, which is about the Anglo-Indian community of India. Center bottom is Stories from the Valley, which is again about a small migrant community in Northeast through the eyes of people who grew up there, and archiving a very multilingual. The text is both in Khasi and English, along with the photographs, and creates a sort of memory making of the migrants who are in this place called Happy Valley. On your bottom left is Mona Ahmed's Myself Mona Ahmed, which is a collaborative project by Anita Singh, where her friend, in her quintessential English, which is a sort of grammatically incorrect English in the title, and also through her texts, posits herself within the book along with photographs of the Anita. Photobooks have also become sites of resistance in South Asia. The first row of books, 3 of them have been published by Yarbal Books, and it talks about the occupation in Kashmir, and through the first one, Witness Kashmir, is about photojournalists and their archives. It was triggered by the floods in Kashmir, and archiving became something that they realized was necessary because the actual physical archives would be lost. And the book was sort of a result of this documenting photojournalists from Kashmir and how they see the conflict in the region. Paper text messages from Kashmir and Cups of Noon Chai, both by Alana Hunt, have been long-term projects that she has done. Each talk about conversation within the local people in Kashmir and how they sort of deal with the occupation and the militarization and the impunity of Indian Army in the region. The book on your bottom right, Dalit, A Quest for Dignity, is from Nepal, again, a product of Nepal Picture Library. And it talks about the history of Dalit resistance in Nepal. On your left, bottom left, is Percy Kaki's This Is My Protest, which is a dummy book which has been traveling in a exhibition called Kagazi Peraha, which talks about, again, this self-publishing and resistance within the photo book community in India and South Asia. We have talked about colonial gaze and elitism inside photography community in South Asia. And one of the things that has come out of this is photographers are going inwards, looking through into their community and their families. All these books are part of this motif, which I traced within my research. Each book either is a collaboration with their parent or uh, talks about their family meetings and motherhood, various different facets of domestic life, which and also interpersonal relationships, which photo book makers are um, creating in their work. I wanted to talk about these two other books, which sort of blur the boundary between documentary and staged fiction and reality. One is Vasantha Yoganathan's Myth of Two Souls, which is a retelling of the Ramayana, which is an epic from India, and through everyday photographs with across the region, um, he has sort of recreated this semiotic of images to um, posit Mahabharata, Ramayana within the contemporary lens. The other book, which is Samya Sankar Bose's Where the Birds Never Sing, talks about a massacre in Bengal, and a massacre which has been hidden from mainstream media, and it's very difficult to find the history about. And so he employed a range of actors to recreate certain episodes from the tragedy, and also conducted intensive interviews with survivors to get the oral history of tragedy. Archival practices within South Asia is also sort of, I feel like, a counter strategy to deal with the cultural amnesia happening because of the partitioning of the region. Through archives, photo book makers want to recreate the history that their region has. I want to talk about here of Pakistan, a fashionable history, which is the history of Pakistan through fashion photography, designers, and style. I also want to talk about the Paper Trail of War, American propaganda leaflets by Kajastan Press. It's uh, it's an archiving practice which talks about propaganda instead of protest, and through these meticulous collection of work, a very different kind of photo book emerges. Everyday Indian Aesthetic and Sadak by Aradhana Sheth and Shaili Goel creates this everyday aesthetics of beauty and design within across the region, and also on the in Sadak, for example, this is being talked about through hand painted signs, which is a very common visual that we usually see in public spaces. On your bottom left is a book called Archives of the Jadavpur Photography Club, which is NID's like National Institute of Design alumni Saurav Sil's book. It has archived photographs from photography club of a very popular educational institute where he used to study, and that one picture here you can also see Phototone, which was also a publication of the photo club in Jadavpur. Unseen Burma and Yangon Fashion, again from Burma, different ways of seeing Myanmar and not falling back to the conflict-ridden portrayal of the place. So photo books have also part of the public, and in my reading of Matt Johnson's book, Photo Books and a Critical Companion to Contemporary Medium, I realized that the photo book community is sort of an insular community, and to counter this problem, a lot of different institutes such as the Pathshala South Asian Media Institute, and Danita's work, which again uses a materiality which is more accessible to general public and not just the art world. These are certain peripheral photo book activities and practices which caught my attention. There are fashion catalogs, a lot of vernacular printing across South Asia, um, we, which one leans into while studying photo book making, not just as a contemporary art practice, but also something like a photo album, which is like present in almost every household. And one of the pictures I also put is a scrapbooking practice, which my friends and I used to do. And another picture here on your top right is from the archives of Jadavpur Photography Club, which talks about the insides of a girls' hostel and how these photography and text practices are created in everyday life. Some photo book makers have also gone a very self-sustaining way of distributing their work and creating it. Anurag Banerjee's book again got a government funding, and he was able to create the book in a way in which he didn't have to seek a lot of help from external bodies, and he could distribute the book through his Instagram. Ritesh Chandani's book again is a very sustainable practice, and the way he has been able to distribute the book is also through a very through his networks and social media, and even the like payments and everything, it's being done through digital formats. There are a lot of hybrid and co-learning practices in South Asia. One of them is MAP Museum's History of Photography in India course, which is freely accessible to all. Studio Goppo in Shantiniketan, again, it helps create these workshops in analog photography. I've talked about Pathshala, and it's one of the leading institutes in South Asia, and uh, creates these spaces where new voices can emerge. There are a lot of workshops happening from Tanvi Mishra's Image Assembly and other Anne Graffin's photobook process, which keeps the conversation going. And in Matt Johnson's book, we also learned about activation and amplification of photo books. And I feel like these various activities sort of do that, which is like once you create the book, it needs to have an afterlife to reach other people. Other practices like curatorial and editorial ways of looking at photo books have also been instrumental in creating this photo book ecosystem here. I would also like to mention the Photo Book podcast by Priyanka Acharya, which has been instrumental in this research. Infrastructure-wise, because my co-writer comes from an architecture background, she was also very interested in how the infrastructure around photo book is being created. And so there we have two photo book libraries, one in Mumbai and one in Delhi, Offset and Jojo Library. And these create a space where people can come and read and learn, and also their other activities sort of create again this amplification and activation of photo books. So a lot of this is happening across social media, like whether it is being presented in Instagram or the Kazakhstan's like entire online website where you can get archival material and buy them or get digital downloads. The Northeast Audiovisual Archive is also instrumental in, it began as a digital archive. Nepal Picture Library began as a digital archive and created photo books which have a material life. Another thing that I wanted to mention is because of the censorship and other issues that literature and other more mainstream print culture has to deal with, photo books sort of are able to undergo under the radar because of its insular quality about it, and even heavily repressed movements like the Shinebug movement is able to get an afterlife in a photo book. Kagazi Pera, again, it's about the resistance through photo books. There are other various means of distributing photo books within the online space. Offset, all of them also have their virtual book stores. In terms of funding, which is like my last part of the this presentation, I wanted to mention the kind of funding which is available to photo book makers, but also the problems that they have to face and which hampers their practice. But through various other organizations like Photo South Asia and even individual patronage. For example, in your bottom right, we see a story about an archive that was created during an ethnographic research in a film in a media institute, and later the ethnographic project was about Patwa Chitrakars, who are like folk painters, but later they were commissioned by the researcher to repaint them and as how they saw them, and it sort of inverted the gaze. These are a few famous ongoing platforms which are championing photo book practices. Al-Qazi Foundation, it has a dedicated photo book grant annually. And yeah, these are a few acknowledgements that I wanted to make to people who helped us create this presentation. And yeah, thank you. And I look forward to your feedback and having this conversation with you.
Thank you very much. That was terrific and a huge amount of information. And again, we will have an opportunity for Q&A and discussion at the end, but want to keep us moving along. So next up is Alisa Prince, and thank you very much.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone tuning in from around the world. Thank you, David Solo and the entire 10x10 team, as well as the jurors who selected our projects to receive this grant. My fellow panelists, thank you for being here with me. And I also want to thank each of the librarians at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale and the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library at Emory University. Today, I'm thrilled to share some of my findings from the research that I've conducted on the Harlem Book of the Dead and how I understand it to be securing a space for Black subjectivity in the future, even after death, in Tomorrow is Here, image and text in the Harlem Book of the Dead. In this presentation, I'll offer an overview of the book and its makers, and a look at the photographic and poetic methods it uses, and how they work in tandem to move the genre of postmortem photography, specifically funeral portraiture, beyond its prescriptive function to remember the deceased, and toward the construction of futurity. The Harlem Book of the Dead was created in collaboration with artist and historian Camille Billups, poet Owen Dodson, author Toni Morrison, and photographer James Van Der Zee, and it was published by Morgan & Morgan in 1978. The book includes about 40 photographic portraits made by Van Der Zee between the 1920s and 40s to illustrate the mourning practices of people in Harlem at that time. They are coupled with poetry written by Dodson on most of the pages throughout the book. It begins with a foreword by Morrison, includes an interview with James Van Der Zee conducted by Billups, and finally, the photographer's notes on his photographs toward the end of the book. On the left in this photograph is Camille Billups, an artist, educator, and archivist. A decade before the publication of the Harlem Book of the Dead in 1968, she and her husband, the theater historian and educator James V. Hatch, established the Camille Billups and James V. Hatch Archive, which consists of materials relating to 20th century Black American art and culture. And so given this dedication to the collection and preservation of Black artistry, it's fitting that Billups recognized Vanderzee's funeral portraits as a part of a much larger history of death practices, namely the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is really a tradition of funerary texts beginning as early as 1650 BC that would evolve over more than 1,000 years and contain a variety of spells to assist the deceased in the afterlife. In the same way that these books of spells would assist Egyptians in the afterlife, the Harlem Book of the Dead serves to assist the dead in the future. On the right in this photograph is poet Owen Dodson. And on the bottom center is photographer James Vanderzee. So Billups paired two of the most renowned Black photographers and poets between the 20th century for this project. She says, quote, "Mr. Vanderzee helps the undertaker wash the body. Mr. Dodson helps the priest cleanse the soul." Not pictured here is the great American novelist Toni Morrison, who writes of the photographs in her foreword that, quote, "Owen Dodson is stirred to poetry in which life trembles in every metaphor." The book also includes an interview between Billups and Vanderzee titled "A Very Long Conversation with James Vanderzee at the Age of 91" that is interspersed throughout the photographs and poetry. This interview provides insights into Vanderzee's perspective as a photographer of the dead, focusing on themes like children, mothers, fathers, and soldiers. The interview also offers biographical details about the photographer, from his upbringing in Lenox, Massachusetts, to the navigation of his romantic life, fatherhood, and career. The book is structured such that a compilation of poetically enlivened post-mortem photographs and Vanderzee's recounting of his life are woven together toward the end of his long life, as he would pass away a few years after the publication in 1983. Here we have the opening photograph and poem. In Vanderzee's photograph on the right, explosions of floral bouquets jump out to meet the viewer. As the geometric architecture of the church draws us into the space, you see the frame is structured by the linear forms in the church, and these lines evenly split the bottom of the image into thirds, where two rows of pews opposite one another designate a space for the viewer. Precisely centered in the foreground, standing before a casket. Positioning the viewer in this way enables the photograph to effectively welcome, as the signage at the top of the image says, the viewer into this funerary spectacle. At left, Dodson writes, "Death always happens to somebody else, not the dead." And right away, Dodson offers text that removes the morbidness of the photographs of the deceased to come, while his opening words recognize that those who would continue living mourn and seek to honor the dead. His words also prime us to understand the dead is carrying on. Together, the text and image here transform the viewer from an observer into a participant. The photographs here provide a sense of Vanderzee's funeral image-making style. He indulged in creative, decorative compositions and frequently used photo montage to incorporate images of angels, Jesus Christ, biblical passages, poetry, and even images of the deceased before death. In the description of the plates at the back of the book, Vanderzee comments on his process and how he would position props during the shoot and insert additional imagery later, depending on what he felt the photographs needed. For instance, speaking about the photograph on the left, he notes that when a person did not have a lot of flowers at their funeral, he would create a more tightly cropped image. Through his careful attentiveness to portrayals of death and the dead, Vanderzee developed this style and quickly established a name for himself as a select funeral photographer for Harlem residents. Art historian and anthropologist Christopher Pinney offers the concept of surfacism, which I find useful in viewing van der Zee's photographs. Because surfacism challenges realist documentary spatiotemporality as the prime function of photography. Pinney explains that the image surface becomes a site of mobility and mutability. The concern of surfacist photography is thus not indexicality or the ability to define what is fact, but rather undoing traditional perspective on the surface. Without the aim of reflecting a fixed time and space in the image, the photographic surface garners the power to envision new realities. And in this way, surfacism provides a realm of possibility, encouraging not a view of reality, but insight into its construction. This method of image making lays the foundation for the Harlem Book of the Dead. In both of these examples, van der Zee's photographs and Dodson's text use humor to hold space for the subjectivity of the deceased. On the left, one deceased man laments that he passed away on the same day as the famed actress Florence Mills. Van der Zee poses him propped up on a bed, seemingly reading a newspaper. Dodson imagines the words, "The obituary page was supposed to be all about me today." On the top left of the image on the left, we see Jesus Christ superimposed onto the photograph. And on the right is part of William Cullen Bryant's popular poem, Thanatopsis. While Bryant's poetry speaks to the mourner who would have this photograph, Dodson's speaks for the dead. On the right, a woman who was clearly beloved by her community, as evinced by the loads of flowers around her, lays in her casket, and Dodson gives her the words, "Cease messing around and read me the messages on the cards from my flowers." Here, Dodson asserts that the desire to communicate between life and death is mutual. We don't only honor the deceased with cards and flowers, but they want to know what we're saying. They're thinking of us too, even in this future unseen. Together, the text and images in the Harlem Book of the Dead insist on the presence of Black subjectivity in the future as a given, a must. I understand the book to be an exercise in what the critical theorist Saidiya Hartman coined critical fabulation. Hartman uses critical fabulation to address histories of slavery that cannot be recovered. She defines critical fabulation as, quote, playing with and rearranging the basic elements of the story by representing the sequence of events in divergent stories and from contested points of view. And she continues, I have attempted to jeopardize the status of the event, to displace the received and authorized account, and to imagine what might have happened or might have been said or might have been done. She conceived of this method of critical fabulation as a means to grapple with the narrowness of conventional accounts of history and the limits of the archive. In the face of clear unknowability of details of enslaved people's lives, she encourages imaginative invention and notes the necessity of simultaneously working with and against what records do exist. Critical fabulation allows us to simultaneously hold spaces at which individual subjectivities could emerge and affirm an eternal presence of Black subjectivity without making definitive statements about the unnamed sitters. As Hartman explains in the text on this slide, the point is not to give voice to these subjects, but to imagine what cannot be verified. Whereas Hartman applies this method to unveiling unknowable histories, I interpret Billups, Dodson, and van der Zee as addressing a future that cannot be verified. The text and images in the Harlem Book of the Dead are not meant to define what we don't know, but to declare a space for the souls depicted that extends beyond life. In order to understand how that space is declared, I'm interested in the Harlem Book of the Dead in the ways that it marks time, specifically how the temporal clauses and verb tenses used in the poetry coalesce with the photographic medium. Photographs are ostensibly always of the past, and yet here they speak to the present and future. The funeral portrait on the right depicts a woman in her casket surrounded by flowers and an image of Jesus superimposed on the left. Turning to Dodson's accompanying poetry on the left, I would like to highlight his grammar. He writes, "They lean over me and say, 'Who deathed you? Who, 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 who?' I whisper, 'Tell you presently, shortly, this evening, tomorrow.' Tomorrow is here, and you out there safe. I'm safe in here, Tootsie." Tomorrow always refers to the future, and yet this woman speaks to her lover that tomorrow is here, tomorrow is now, and it is she, the deceased, speaking in this future present moment. Van der Zee recalls in his notes that this woman was murdered by her lover. And Toni Morrison would go on to write Jazz, inspired by this photograph, a novel that similarly moves across space and time. In another example, Van der Zee incorporates a photograph of a child while he was alive onto the surface of his funeral portrait. Through photo montage, the photographer visually implies the continuation of the boy's presence post-mortem. I highlight this particular photograph because it illustrates that the transcendence of a singular tense that I identify as occurring throughout the book is not exclusive to the poetic text, but is at times right on the image surface itself. In the Owen Dodson collection at the Beinecke Library at Yale University, I found numerous reviews of the Harlem Book of the Dead, published from 1978 into the early 1980s. Many of them applauded the book as unique and curious, speaking to a broad audience, as book reviews do, but they don't quite recognize its capacity to affirm the future of the dead. In the Billups and Hatch archive at Emory University, those public reviews are complemented by more personal notes to the makers from artists like Barnett Honeywood and Faith Ringgold. On the right here, a card with a drawing from Ringgold thanks Billups for the book. At left, Barnett P. Honeywood writes that she loves and cherishes the book, saying, quote, "It has been a unique visual, emotional, educational, and spiritual experience reading and sharing it with family and friends." Also in the archive at Emory are numerous correspondences between Billups and Alice Wyndham. And Wyndham, a historian, educator, and activist, offers quite a full response to seeing the book. She confesses that she harbored feelings of guilt for having photographed her grandfather and W.E.B. Du Bois in their caskets, and describes that viewing the Harlem Book of the Dead was transformative, allowing her to instead feel a part of a proud tradition. Like the one shown here, multiple letters from Wyndham critique the use of white depictions of Jesus Christ. But this particular letter also opens with a revealing line that warrants further research. She writes, "When I got your card from Germany, the announcement of your performance piece, I ached for a capsule description to let me know how you were dramatizing your book. That must have been something." And so I'll close with this thought and allow us all to imagine how Billups may have reconstructed this tense-hopping, space-holding photo book of the dead as performance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was, again, a fascinating presentation on a book I know a little bit about, but it's great to hear so much more. So thank you very much. And we will now move on to our third presentation, Ethel-Ruth Tawe, and it's all yours.
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay. And my screen sharing?
Yes, all set.
Great. Thank you to everyone who's present here today, despite all our different time zones. And thank you, of course, to 10 by 10. I'm going to be presenting my project, The Algorithms of Colonial African Photobooks. And of course, here I'm just simply introducing some key topics as it's a much wider research. So I've broken this down into 3 main sections. I'll begin with historical context on basically how this research came about, some findings, and then go into the anatomy of photo books and what that really means. And then kind of close this off with thinking about how we're reprogramming and having artistic interventions that expose this in a different light. So before getting into all of that, I'll just go through a couple of definitions because these terms tend to have different meanings. But for the purpose of this, I'm working with certain ones to kind of shape the research. So simply put, an algorithm is a set of rules using data sets, training data for machine learning and building artificial intelligence. So these are the foundations of a rapidly morphing digital space we're increasingly being programmed into. And while this is highly sophisticated in many ways and seemingly self-intelligent, algorithms also show a strong formulaic correlation with the functions and anatomy of colonial photo books, which I'll be focusing on. And this is through their algorithmic biases, the coded gaze of modern technologies, and this can be especially paralleled to the programming techniques of ethnographic photo books as instruments of empire. So essentially, I'm thinking through here that in the same ways that colonial photo books work to artificially construct collective imaginations of Africa, it's the same way that algorithms function today in the programming of our minds. When thinking about technology, I'm really borrowing a definition from the platform Afrotectopia. So thinking about this beyond the material, beyond the matter, and thinking more of less of a hardware than a software. So thinking of it as an extension of a sentient capabilities, not just that of humans, but beyond, and the nuanced ways in which these inform our behaviors. And as for digital colonialism here, I'm thinking about it from the lens of Future Interventions Lab's definition, which is using the extractive practices of colonialism and unbalanced power structures, such as where servers are hosted and routed, as well as domain ownership. So really just thinking about how territorial forms of colonialism have been extended into the digital realm. And in the case where now we can think of the idea of photo books being created for artistic purposes, that of course wasn't really the case in the colonial context, and where photo books were primarily created for propaganda. So considering all these things on all these definitions led me to start thinking about this project and its concept in the form of soft war or software. So this became the basis of this research and the questions I still continue to sit with. So just to give some background of how this all started, was thinking about the medium of the photo book and its own right. So in 2023, I presented an artistic response to Africa in the Photo Book, a platform and collection by photo historian Ben Kravenko, who's on here, which is concerned with the visual representation of Africa as expressed through the medium of the photo book. So our presentation was titled Double Exposures, and in the exhibition, we investigated the tensions between the folds of the pages, the afterlives of images, their captions and contexts. From the early use of propaganda in a troubling colonial archive to post-colonial technologies of capture, we asked questions with care about the lens from which photo books are read today. framing and bending chronologies, the exhibition included footnotes and an annotated bibliography with a time spiral, which is on screen. So assessing all of this, I began to understand early African photo books, colonial photo books, as functioning algorithmically, with a set of rules for surveillance in the colonial machine and muting the interior lives of those depicted. And a question that emerged from this was then, what are the afterlives of these photo book algorithms today in the age of artificial intelligence and machine learning? According to Dr. Sophia Noble, the author of Algorithms of Oppression, Google's first digitization project involved mass scanning of books at libraries to build what she believes were the earliest data sets for machine learning and search engines. In her work, Dr. Noble interrogates examples of her searches for quote unquote Black girls, resulting in primarily pornographic material, an extension of colonial photo books' notorious fixation on the Black female form from a predominantly white male gaze. African women were disproportionately subjected to this gaze, hence their appointments as sitters for staged, exoticized, and eroticized images that were sent across the Atlantic to flaunt human conquest. So I'm going to go into what I'm thinking about as the anatomy of photo books, which is essentially the design choices that underscore the hierarchies and the ways in which these were presented, the use of layouts which favor perceptions from a European imagination of Africa. Their agendas often also change based on a range of situations and political changes, oftentimes reinforcing a binary opposition, such as civilized versus uncivilized, or the colony versus the metropolis, etc. We'll also get into how their production and circulation fluctuated to serve different needs, and thinking about sequencing, scrolling, the haptics, the user experience, and how this has all been projected into the digital space to capitalize on programming the minds of the masses. So essentially, I'm thinking about how photo books can be understood as the earliest form of social media, which are seemingly open and free, but heavily invested in mining personal data. First, I just want to think about the formulaic sequencing of the photo book and how we have those extended in the user experience today. So as an example, here is the book Africa Occidental by Jose Augusto de Cunha. And this is one of the exemplary books earlier on that really captivated all the different techniques that were used. So starting with the cover being extremely illustrious, the design, the bold colors and choices that were made, that made for its success, as well as the way it was sequenced. So oftentimes these books began with the land, with flora and fauna, with maps and settlements. And people were depicted in the same ways that they would photograph the fauna. So their nudity actually enhanced or confirmed their dehumanization, and they were considered part of the natural environment, but as in barbaric and wild. In the same ways today, the algorithms and digital space prioritize content that generates revenue and often perpetuating visual narratives that align with market expectations rather than authentic representation. So again, using captivating imagery, the algorithms are driven by these metrics and favor attention and similar approaches that we see earlier on with photo books, colonial photo books. Another component of this was the captioning, of course, because here captions act as metadata, which can reinforce stereotypes and encode that into our everyday fabric. So with early photo books, this was, of course, handwritten captions that turned into type. So they're offering the sort of perspective of exploration or empirical evidence and truth in the text, which of course, is constructed, and it continues to do so. They serve to contextualize or miscontextualize, rather, people's stories. And captions continue to play a crucial role in shaping our immediate response. So today we see that with platforms like Instagram or the larger ones that are most in use, where these same designs, these same approaches are simply brought into this space and essentially creating very similar effects. Another component is the circulation and production of these books. So for early photo books, colonial photo books, sometimes they would often produce different versions of the photo books for different agendas. So motivations from the producers would vary. An example of this was A Spear for Freedom, a 1942 photo book by A.G. Dixon. The cover here almost looks AI generated, interestingly enough. But this book one version was primarily served as recruitment for Indigenous men from East Africa, while another was an abridged version, which was then sold to British audiences at home and introduced Africans as allies fighting for the same cause, quote unquote. And sometimes these books would highlight the role of the explorer, quote unquote, and it would be prefaced by a bio to introduce them. So there's a sense of prioritizing authorship for capitalist needs, of course. But what does this mean today, where images and stories online are increasingly more anonymous, but also serve to conceal devious acts or intentional silencing? So in terms of actually producing these algorithms or these training this AI today, while it's still primarily built from a Western lens, a huge aspect of how this data is actually sourced. This data, the crowdsourced data, often reflects the views of those with higher access to the internet and ability to assert dominance in cyberspace as they do in real life. So there is clear parallels between our realities being extended into these spaces, as well as their memories in the photo books that were then projected into this. An example of this production in modern times is the mining centers in Kenya, which of course, again, disproportionately affect women, and the invisible labor of the building of these algorithms. For example, here, the OpenAI used Kenyan workers, paid them less than $2 per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. And we continue to see a lot of reports about this. And again, a parallel between the way these are being constructed remains. So this is an example of what I'm thinking about as soft war or software, for their ability, again, to weaponize Black bodies, though, of course, this does not lack subversion. Another component of this I started to think about is this idea of haptic images. Of course, when we think of technology and we think of the experience of scrolling, we think of touch. And in the same way that we would touch these photo books and hold them, of course, it's being transformed with the hardware that we use today. And I'm still questioning what does this mean in terms of the experience and how we are interacting with these problematic images today. So in terms of reprogramming and several artistic interventions, I would say, I'll give an example of some works that were produced in the context of the response I mentioned earlier, that really are the earliest forms of questioning what this really means and the parallels between these two mediums. So one work in particular is Opacity, which is a counter-study on the confrontational practices and visibility in colonial photo books. So in this case, we use 48 replicated plates in their original sequence from a portfolio book on people of the Malange and Lunda region of Angola. And this work illustrates the common element of compelled photography and propaganda at the time. The author ironically presents this photo study as fact with no pretension of an ethnographic study, quote unquote, which this work then refutes and redacts, and the exposed plates with turned backs are read as unintended signals of refusal and misidentification. So in this case, viewers were invited to have a haptic encounter and interact by touching and lifting the transparent sheets to reveal the images beneath, but only after posing the new and pertinent questions they were now filled with. And this particular work and the plates were taken from a book called Ethnografia Angolana, which is a portfolio book by Portuguese engineer and amateur anthropologist Fernando Muta. This particular installation was of the work at Photo Ireland in 2023. Another work was Typing, which is a silent film on embodied gestures of refusal. So this particular work was a video, single channel video projected back into a photo book to kind of look at the work as if it was moving and what that could mean if we thought about these books that way. So the moving portrait reveals signals of negation and the discomforting position African sitters were often subjected to. So it becomes much more apparent, a fuller context of the ways in which these images were made and their context. And this sits in this case in contrast to the word typing, which is a pending caption and with ellipsis, alluding to the waiting of a message that never arrives, and essentially a pseudoscientific attempt to dehumanize and catalog African people into rigid types. So this work allows the viewer to see this rejection and this refusal using footage from a 1940s travelogue film by Paul Hoffler, who also co-authored the exploitation film and book Africa Speaks from the 1930s. So to conclude, like AI today, colonial photography no longer gives a realistic representation, or no longer gave a realistic representation of the subject, but constructed images or imagination for the sake of its intended effect on the viewer. There continues to be counter theories such as ancestral intelligence or thinking about AI beyond what it has been constructed to be, which really aims to reimagine the logic of these technologies and ways of care for our data bodies. And we're asking here, how can we train AI with anti-colonial imagery and data sets? So thinking about things from facial recognition technology, using image analysis, biometrics, synthesize imagery from platforms like Midjourney, and knowing that overall photography is deeply embedded with the evolution of AI and its large language models. So essentially, as we continue to engage with these technologies, we must consider the social implications and serious concerns, as well as recognize that the earliest memories of these include data from colonial photo books. And I'll be sharing a reading and watch list with some material, just a few highlighted here that continue this conversation on the topic in different approaches, but the intersection between these colonial histories and what we see today in the digital space. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to 10 by 10 and all those who spent some time thinking through this with me. And thank you, Ben, also from Africa and the Photo Book, as well as Photo Ireland, where a lot of the seeds were planted for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a terrific series of presentations, and as mentioned, we have some time for Q&A. Let's see, should have enabled things so that people can unmute if they wish. And if anyone has questions, or if you have questions for each other, that's fine, and we hopefully can explore some of these topics in more detail. So once again, thank you very much for all the work on this. Maybe to start, I think both Ethel and Sudeshna, you talked in various ways about sort of ongoing influences of colonialism in different ways with this, both from a funding standpoint, from a digital platform standpoint. And I think you both touched on it, but I was wondering if you could say more about whether there are emerging sort of alternative platforms that, particularly in the digital space, and the sort of ability to create sort of separate or new platforms that are showing what a different, less colonial influenced set of perspectives can offer.
Should I go first?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, colonialism and like it does not really translate now in terms of decoloniality in like even though the previous structures of colonialism may have shifted, but they have been now assumed by new elite members who are propagators of, let's say, art. So, for example, we have in India this thing called a CSR initiative, where corporates fund art, and it creates the art of least resistance because their funding is coming from these corporate behemoths. You mentioned about alternative digital platforms, and I would again like to reiterate Nepal Picture Library as one of the best examples of what community-based archiving on digital media and the kind of exhibitional practices that they also do, which is sort of outside the white cube of the museum and bringing it to the streets where a more hyper-local history of a region can be shared by the people whose history is being represented in the pictures by collecting, archiving a lot of vernacular images. Within social media in India and in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, a lot of individual initiatives of collecting and photographing have emerged. And it's a slow process, and there's a long way to go. And yeah, I think that's what I can say for now.
Yeah, I'll just add to that something I've been observing as well is really just rethinking what technology is from a sort of decolonial lens. So thinking beyond, of course, like I mentioned, the hardware, but really thinking about ancestral technology, which is rooted more in practice and care, and less about these big tech modes of production. And something, for example, that the collective future inventions that I mentioned also so continue to explore and suggest is this idea of digital gardens or small internet where we don't necessarily have to just, of course, succumb to what is available, even though we are already so much in it. But just knowing that there's possibilities to create what we want to see and find community in those spaces, I think is something that has been happening. In terms of actual spaces to recommend or to think through, I think I could also include that in the reading and like watch list as well. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Alisa, I was wondering if, as part of some of the archival research, there was more information about how the different pieces of Harlem Book of the Dead came together. So from the sort of images and photographs, the poetry, the text, was there sort of an overarching process of how, particularly the sort of poems were written in conjunction with the photos, and then sort of how this all came together in a in the form we see it today?
Sure, yeah. In a number of the texts that I found in the archives, both James Van Der Zee and Camille Billups commented on this sense in that moment in 1978 that the kind of value that would be placed on life, that we would carry over in how we think about the dead, the ways that we value and honor the dead was lacking in a particular way. So I think that was sort of the impetus to create a book for the people, for the public in that particular moment. And then in terms of actually making it, Owen Dodson, a friend of Billups, would respond essentially to the James Van Der Zee photographs. And then Morgan and Morgan had also already published a biography of James Van Der Zee earlier, before this, the Harlem Book of the Dead came out. So it seems like Billups is just kind of interested there in conducting that interview to like expound a bit more on areas that are maybe touched on more formally in the biography, but here it's just like a conversation with this man at age 91, kind of just allowing him to think back and remember the time when he was making these photographs.
There's a question from Chantal Zakari. I don't know if she wants to ask directly, but for Sudeshna, these are fascinating books from South Asia. Is there a library that houses this collection in the U.S.? A bookstore that carries some, or how could someone see more of these books, either the actual books or PDFs or otherwise? It was such an interesting array of material, but which a lot of us, some of them are known, but I think a lot aren't.
Yeah, I think a lot of the books are actually limited editions. So, like, even finding the books here is a huge issue. One of the archival books actually had only 6 printed copies because there was copyright issue with the college photo club not allowing any kind of distribution of the book for profit. A few books like Gory Gills, I think the PDF is available. A lot of the books travel to book fairs in Paris and New York. But I don't think there is like a dedicated photo book library about South Asia in the US.
Are there anyone else with a question? You should be able to unmute yourself if you want. Or do you have any questions for each other? I know we've been going on for a little while. Well then, again, thank you very much. This has been recorded and will be posted. So if people, I'm going to stop the recording now. And if anyone sort of wants to unmute and say hello, that's fine as well, or we'll wrap up. So again, thank you very much.